Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran and this is India Calling, our brand new weekly show on all things India and G20. Now over the next 1 hour, I'll get you all the news related to India's presidency of the G20. All right, then let's get started. First up, a roundup of events held this week. Kolkata hosted a G20 meeting from the 9th to 11th January. Take a look at all the actions that unfolded over 3 days.
Three days of intense deliberations in Kolkata on ways to advance financial inclusion in G20 countries drew to a close on Wednesday. The first meeting of the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion started on Monday with a symposium on unlocking the potentials of digital public infrastructure for advancing financial inclusion and productivity gains. During the symposium, a special message was read out by Queen Maxima of Netherlands, highlighting achievements of India's digital stack.
Greater connectivity and digital IDs allow access to financial services for millions previously left behind. Fair competition and interoperable payment systems help markets work better for even the smallest scale customers. Cybersecurity, customer protection, data governance, and digital literacy help marginalized communities navigate these services in ways that work for them.
The second day saw deliberations on leveraging digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion and productivity gains. With about 31% of the world's population largely women, poor and less educated adults still excluded from the formal financial system, and many G20 developing countries facing challenges of opening bank accounts and providing a system for smooth digital payments. The G20 working group also discussed ways to reduce cost of remittances to 3% from the current global average of more than 6%. A seminar on financial literacy was also organized in which around 1,800 school students participated to enhance their understanding of banking, digital payments, insurance, investment, fraud protection and grievance redressal. The third and final day of the deliberations in Kolkata focused on MSME finance and discussed terms of reference for the Financial Inclusion Action Plan for 2023, with inputs from Ajay Mishra in Kolkata, Bureau Report DD India.
On 12th and 13th January, India hosted a virtual Voice of Global South Summit. The idea behind it was to seek the views of countries in the Global South and incorporate them into the agenda of India's G20 presidency.
We, the Global South, have the largest stakes in the future. 3/4 of humanity lives in our countries. We should also have equivalent voice. Hence, at the 8-decade-old model of global governance slowly changes, we should try to shape the emerging order.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi exhorted leaders of countries comprising the Global South to collectively shape the emerging global order. Addressing on first day of Voice of Global South Summit, Prime Minister Modi called for a global agenda of respond, recognize, respect and reform. Revolving around the theme Voice of Global South for human-centric development, the summit saw Prime Minister Modi put the spotlight on how, even though the Global South is worst affected by global challenges, its voice is not factored in the search for solutions, and under its G20 presidency, India aims to amplify its voice. On the second day of the summit, the Prime Minister said that India's Lifestyle for Environment or LIFE initiative focused on mindful consumption and circular economy.
developing countries are united in believing that the developed world had not fulfilled their obligations on climate finance and technology. We also agree that apart from controlling emissions in production, it is equally important to move away from use and throw consumption towards more environment friendly, sustainable lifestyles. This is the central philosophy behind India's Lifestyle for Environment or LIFE initiative, which focuses on mindful consumption and circular economy.
Over the 2 days, the summit discussed 8 priority areas to produce new and creative ideas which could become the basis of the voice of the Global South in G20 and other fora. Bureau Report, DD India.
Another event that was held in the week gone by was the maiden meeting of Think 20. Now, Think 20 is one of 9 engagement groups on the non-government side of the G20. It brings together think tanks, scholars, academics from all over the world. And this particular meeting was held on the 13th and 14th of January. All right, time now for our next segment called Explainer. Now, this week, we tell you all about India's push for green hydrogen. I'll break it down for you so that you stay better informed. Now, to take a look at the graphics behind me on the wall, India has approved a $2.4 billion national green hydrogen mission that aims to make the country a global hub for using, producing and exporting green hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is an industrial fuel with a number of applications including production of ammonia fertilizer, steel, refineries and electricity. It's the simplest and smallest element in the periodic table. Now, green hydrogen is defined as hydrogen produced by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen using renewable energy such as solar or wind. It's the most environment friendly way of producing hydrogen. Now, all the hydrogen produced today is the so-called black or brown hydrogen because they are produced from coal. Now, then there is grey hydrogen which is produced from natural gas and blue hydrogen from fossil fuel sources where carbon emission is captured. Next, the National Green Hydrogen Mission aims to make India a net exporter of green hydrogen by incentivizing commercial production of the fuel. India wants to produce 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen per year by the year 2030. But the high cost of production of green hydrogen is a main reason for its very poor use. High cost of transporting and storing hydrogen and making electrolyzers are key issues that need to be resolved. But that said, the hydrogen market is only expected to grow. Green hydrogen can also be used for urban gas supply and transportation. Right, we're introducing a new segment this week on India Calling. It's called Country Profile. And we're focusing on Australia. Here's a quick look at India-Australia relations.
India and Australia are members of the G20 and Quad. Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Anthony Albanese have already met 3 times in the last 9 months. Modi and Albanese first met in Japan in May 2022 on the margins of the Quad summit. They met a second time in Japan in September 2022 for the funeral of late Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. Their third meeting took place in Bali, Indonesia on the margins of the G20 summit in November 2022. They will meet a 4th time when Albanese visits India in March this year. India and Australia elevated their ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The Prime Ministers, Foreign Ministers and Defence Ministers of India and Australia meet regularly. The first Quad Leaders Summit was held virtually in 2021. Their first in-person summit also took place later that year in the US. The second Quad Leaders Summit took place in Japan in 2022. India and Australia signed a free trade agreement in April 2022. It came into effect in December 2022. Former Indian President Ramnath Kovind visited Australia in 2018. It was the first ever visit by an Indian president to Australia. He unveiled the statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Parramatta in New South Wales as part of the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Mahatma Gandhi and addressed a large gathering of Indian diaspora and local community. Prime Minister Narendra Modi travelled to Australia in 2014 for the G20 summit, followed by a bilateral visit. He addressed a joint sitting of both houses of Australia's Parliament, the first by an Indian Prime Minister. He also addressed the Indian community and diaspora in Sydney. India is one of the top sources of skilled immigrants to Australia. There is a constant flow of students and tourists from India. After England, India is the second largest migrant group in Australia. The growing significance of the community is reflected in the large-scale celebration of Indian festivals in Australia.
And I spoke to a former Indian High Commissioner to Australia, Navdeep Suri, for more on India-Australia ties. And this is what he had to say. Take a listen. Joining me is Ambassador Navdeep Suri. He is a former Indian High Commissioner to Australia. Ambassador Suri, welcome to this special broadcast. Could you give our viewers an overview of India-Australia ties to begin with, and also agreements that were signed in the last few years?
Well, let me say that relations between India and Australia are really at their best ever. When I was High Commissioner Australia a few years back, and many of my predecessors indeed in Canberra used to lament that conversations between India and Australia used to often begin with cricket and kind of meander thereafter into other softer subjects. And the bane of our diplomatic sort of existence was this repetition that there's a great potential in the relationship, but somehow you never seem to achieve the real potential. So what is deeply satisfying for me is finally that word potential is off the horizon. And we don't just talk about cricket, but we have started having conversations about things that really matter to both countries. And here I mean defense and strategic issues. I mean conversations on areas ranging from cybersecurity to critical minerals and a lot of other stuff in between. You can see it in the dynamism of the high-level visits, the frequency at which those are exchanged between the two countries. And you can see it in the increasing sophistication and complexity of the agreements being signed. You can see it in the level of ambition that both countries are willing to state. During my time in Australia, the then Trade Secretary spent many a visit trying to finalize the FTA between the two countries. But it's finally happened. So let me just say that this is a golden era for India's relationship with Australia, and I hope that this will be a long and productive era for both countries. Indeed,
why not? Suri, how do you look at the forthcoming visits to India by Prime Minister Albanese?
Well, it really caps a series of high-level visits that have taken place over the last few months, and visits in both directions, really. In diplomatic parlance, you can have countries that are center stage and countries that are relatively backwaters. And high-level visits is a really good way to measure the dynamism and momentum in a relationship, because everybody's got various priorities. And when you have these visits, I think the visit of Prime Minister Albanese also reflects something which is very important, that there is a real bipartisan consensus in Australia insofar as a relationship with India is concerned. So a relationship that you could say started flowering when Prime Minister Tony Abbott assumed office in 2014. And when Prime Minister Modi went to Australia for the G20 summit in 2014, has really flowered under the stewardship of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and then Scott Morrison. And now there's been a shift in power in Canberra, and the Labour Party is back in power. And you see that one of the early visits that Prime Minister Albanese is making is to India. So I think it reflects that continuum, and it reflects that bipartisan consensus. And I'll be remiss if I didn't add one key factor. I think in a curious and perverse sort of way, while both countries have been keen on this relationship, it really is the hostile actions of China towards both countries that have become a catalyst and have pushed us towards each other at a pace which otherwise might have continued in a more leisurely fashion. But the fact that we are together in the Quad, the fact that we are talking about the Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, looking at very complex defense exercises, maritime domain awareness, all of those other things that are happening on the strategic side is really a function of the egregious behavior of China, whether it came to its very open intimidation and threatening of Australia, or what we have witnessed both in Ladakh and in Tawang.
Indeed. That gives me a perfect segue into my next question to you, Ambassador Suri. How do you look at the elevation of the bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership in the year 2020 in terms of its significance and outcomes?
Well, I think at a very basic level, it's our way of telling the world that this is a relationship that matters. Comprehensive strategic partnerships are done with a very select group of countries. What it does is it broadens the horizon for both countries in terms of the range of agreements, the range of engagements that they want to undertake. And so you see it encompassing everything from defense and security, all the way to critical minerals, all the way to culture and educational exchanges, etc. So really, you know, when you say comprehensive, by definition, it brings in all of these wide range of engagements. But I think it also plays an important role in a different context. It sends a message to the bureaucracies in both countries that this is a special relationship, that amongst all the various things that you do, there's a need to prioritize this relationship, and that often galvanizes at the level of officialdoms the countries to really make that extra effort that they need to deliver on the promises and commitments that the leaders have made to each other and to their people.
Indeed. And talking about trade and investment, Ambassador Suri, how do you look at the bilateral FTA? It took a long time coming, but it's become a reality as of 29th of December, I'm told, last year.
Well, I think at the very basic level, the fact that we've concluded this agreement and we've concluded it so swiftly is a demonstration of political will on both sides. These agreements are complex and they require a lot of give and take. And it also involves stepping back from some of our previously stated positions. It sometimes involves making compromises, and it involves being non-reciprocal in our approach towards the trading relationship. And in this one, for example, what you see is that from 29th of December, 96.4% of Indian exports immediately come under a zero duty regime. Whereas for Australia, the corresponding figure is about 70%. So it isn't a like for like agreement. And I think the Indian negotiators have done well. At one level, it provides a fairly quick and early impetus to a lot of labor-intensive Indian export items, which are predominantly produced by our SME sector. And so whether it's textiles, furniture, leather goods, sports goods, gems and jewelry, all of that, I think the fact that we are now under a zero duty regime means that our exporters get a level playing field for it. It also helps our own industry, because when Australian resources, say lithium, comes at a zero duty into India, our electric battery manufacturers benefit from that, and it gives a fillip to the really rapidly growing electric vehicles industry. And finally, I think where this agreement is important is that it does manage to protect vital Indian interests. It keeps products that are very sensitive for us, milk, dairy, apples grown in Kashmir and Himachal, rice and sugar, outside the ambit of the agreement for the present. So I think that again is a key element. I think, nevertheless, I would give our economic relationship still a can do better report. And the reason I have always tried to pitch for this is, while trade will certainly grow, investment lags. And I think, Australian superannuation funds and some of their sovereign funds and so on, like the Australia Future Fund, need to perhaps take a leaf out of the bullishness shown by Canadian funds, which are similar in nature and have invested into a range of Indian infrastructure sectors. Australian funds, by and large, except Macquarie and perhaps AMP, have still been relatively shy. And I think this is hopefully going to be a nudge to them. That look, there is so much confidence between the two countries at a G2G level, and it is really now time for the private sector and for particularly the big Australian funds to up their game and come to the party.
Well, Suri, since you spoke about G2G, I want you to talk a bit, if you will, about P2P, people-to-people ties as well. It's an important pillar of the bilateral ties, no doubt. How do you look at the people-to-people ties in general, students going to Australia for studies, and all the celebration Indian festivals these days in Australia as well?
Well, the Indian community in Australia is the fastest growing expatriate community. And I think if the current trends continue, the deceleration from China and the acceleration from India, the time is not far when Indians will be the largest overseas community in Australia. Equally important, while you're seeing the addition of new numbers taking place every year, you're also seeing now the emergence of a second generation of the Indian community, and sometimes even a third generation of the Indian community. And just as you saw in the US and in UK, where these next generations which are born in the country start participating actively in political life in that country, and really becomes a solid bridge for the relationship between the two countries. I see that trend now taking shape in Australia. You see the annual lists that Australia announces for its awards, for its national awards, the Order of Australia and so on. And each year you see a growing number of Indians who are recognized for these awards of eminence in different walks of life in Australia. And we've just had the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas conclude in Indore this week. And I was very pleased to see my friend Professor Jagdish Chennapati from Australia being one of the awardees, because he truly is a remarkably accomplished scientist, perhaps one of the world's leading experts in nanotechnology. And to see him at the pinnacle in the Royal Academy of Sciences in Australia, but also being recognized by the Government of India through the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman is just the right message, I think, that we send to our diaspora. And finally, when we speak about culture, and I would say culture beyond Bollywood, much as all of us love our films. For me, as High Commissioner, perhaps the high point was the Festival of India confluence that we did in Australia. We put together 72 events in 6 cities over a 3-month period, and it was the largest foreign festival ever held in Australia. When we did our grand opening at the Sydney Opera House, a lot of people afterwards, and this is, I've now been away for a few years, but if people still remember something from that tenure, it's, oh my God, you did this wonderful presentation of India and Indian culture and literature and music and art to audiences. So I think sometimes in this world where we focus so much on trade and investment and defense and security, we tend occasionally to relegate culture to a lower pedestal. But I can tell you that it is those cultural ties that really endure, those people-to-people ties that really endure. And even if your relationship were to some points hit a rocky phase, the fact that there's such a strong people-to-people connect will make sure that the overall momentum continues. So never underestimate the importance of the cultural dimension.
Absolutely. On that note, Ambassador Suri, may I thank you for joining us on this special broadcast. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, time now for our next segment, India in Numbers. Take a look at the graphics on the wall behind me. I'll throw some numbers at you. Now, $4.2 billion is the first number I have for you. That's the amount of money India saved by choosing solar energy over fossil fuels. Now, by the way, this amount was only for the first 6 months of 2022. Imagine the amount of money India saves in 1 full year. Next, 19.4 million tons is the amount of coal saved. Now, coal is a fossil fuel. It's the dirtiest of all fossil fuels. Now, coal is also the single largest source of global temperature rise. Next, 12.4% of all women pilots in the world come from India. All the other top 5 countries have percentages in single digits only. Australia is second at 7.5%, Canada 7%, the US 5.5%, and the UK at 4.7%. Next, India will become the 3rd largest economy in the world by 2029 or 2030. India's share in world GDP is projected to touch 4% in 2027. And finally, India will overtake Germany in 2027 and Japan by 2029. Right, and now to our social media segment. The G20 meetings are garnering attention on social media too. My colleague Tripti Tripathi gets you all the social media buzz. Take a look.
Paintings, light and sound show and G20 all come together to rule the roost in social media in the week gone by. I am Tripti Tripathi and welcome to another chapter of Social Media Buzz, where we put forth some of the stories which took the virtual world by storm. Let's start with some lovely paintings in Aurangabad. The International Women Delegation is expected to visit Aurangabad as part of the G20 summit in February. And the city is gearing up with some awe-inspiring artwork. The paintings on the wall of the city are catching the attention and is trending on the social media. Interested in history? Well, amidst the hectic parleys in Kolkata, on the sidelines of the first Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion meeting, delegates were given a tour of the City of Joy. And G20 delegates enjoyed a spectacular light and sound show on India's struggle against colonialism, contribution of Indian heroes to independence movement. An exhibition was also organized to showcase a blend of regional art and craft for the G20 delegates to explore in Kolkata. The G20 will not only address climate issues or food crisis, it will also focus on urban issues. U20 was established on highlight on urban related issues and will see Ahmedabad being the host city for the 2023 U20 cycle. It has identified urban water scarcity as a pressing global issue. Social media was buzzing as a video on an exhibition on digital innovation for advancing financial inclusion was posted in Twitter. It showcased the homegrown technologies of India which are being achieved unprecedented milestones by impacting billions of lives. Students are the drivers of change in any society, and no wonder they also dominate the social media. No wonder this post of student community, deliberate in its Chopal, became a massive hit. For any movement to be successful, citizens' participation is a must, and it was seen in huge number in Pune. In run-up to the first G20 meeting of Infrastructure Working Group in Pune, citizens participated with enthusiasm in a cyclothon, and the videos and pictures were doing rounds in social media space. And last but not the least is the news of Japan-India collaboration in climate change, which took the world of social media by storm. Both countries, through the framework of G20, is working on climate change through the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Well, that's all from this section of social media buzz. Hope you like it. For more updates on G20, follow our social media handles. See you next week.
And now to a very special interview. Switzerland takes part in the G20 finance track. It shares India's quest for reform of world bodies to best reflect the realities of the 21st century. And I spoke to Switzerland's ambassador to India, Dr. Ralph Heckner, and began by asking him about Switzerland's take on India and G20. Take a listen. Ambassador Heckner, welcome to this special broadcast. Thank you for your time. Ambassador Heckner, if I can start by asking you about India's presidency of the G20. Switzerland is a member of the G20 finance track, has been taking part in those meetings for some years now. Your expectations or thoughts from India's presidency of the G20 to begin with?
No, thank you for having me. I think we have a unique opportunity, Switzerland and India, to work on finding solutions for global challenges. India is presiding over the G20, and Switzerland, for the very first time, is a non-permanent member in the Security Council. And if you have a look at the priorities that the Honorable Prime Minister has for the G20 presidency and the Swiss government for the Security Council membership in New York, they are aligned. The Prime Minister is talking about an era of no war, of peace. He's talking about one world, one family, one future. And the Federal Council, the Swiss government, has as the priority for Switzerland Security Council's membership 2023 and 24, sustainable peace. So that is the overarching theme and objective of India and of Switzerland together. When it comes to the finance track, we are very grateful to the Indian government that we are again invited as a, I would say, permanent invitee to the finance track. That can be explained. We have been, as you said, rightly said, part of the finance track now since 2016. And Switzerland is an important financial center. So I think that is the main reason why Switzerland is part of the finance track. And I'm sure we will bring our expertise to the table. And also there's another theme that is aligning India and Switzerland. The Prime Minister is very much interested in and working on turning India into the green direction, green energy, a green economy. And the Federal Council had the vision already years back for the Swiss Financial Center to turn it into a sustainable financial center. And sustainable finance is on the agenda of the G20, and Switzerland and India will be part of the solution there too.
Ambassador, another meeting ground between the two countries is this quest for reform of multilateral organizations, be it the World Bank or the IMF or even the UN, for instance. And PM Modi, for one, has spoken about a quote-unquote reformed multilateralism. And Switzerland, for its part, has spoken about reform of the World Bank and the IMF, especially in relation to debt sustainability in low-income countries and debt transparency. Now, in this part of the world, we've seen the instance of Sri Lanka, for instance, which has run under a debt or debt trap, as some call it, under external borrowings, especially from China. So your thoughts on Switzerland's quest for reform of world bodies?
I think there, as you said rightly, we are very much aligned with what India would like to achieve. First, India and Switzerland would like to have a functioning multilateral system. And then some reform is absolutely needed because the world has changed so much that the architecture, the multilateral architecture, has to catch up with. India has the ambition of being a permanent member of the Security Council. Our ambition is to at least have a more effective, efficient and transparent Security Council and a very limited use of the veto, especially by the P5 when they are directly involved in a war. So we come from different angles with different ambitions, having the same objective, a reformed multilateralism. When it comes to IMF, World Bank, Switzerland is in the executive board of the IMF and the World Bank. Both our countries are also in the World Trade Organization. Reform of WTO is also on the table, is also on the agenda of the G20. So I think we are very much aligned with a global feeling of a need of a reform of the existing institutions, always being mindful that the system over the years was a system that provided a lot of opportunities and prosperity and cooperation worldwide. Then when it comes to sustainable debt, I mean, during COVID we saw how important it was that our finances were up to a certain level sustainable. Switzerland was in a very good position because over the last 15 years Switzerland did always achieve a surplus of budget, so we were able to reduce our debt burden to a very low level, and that meant we had enough financial opportunity to deal with COVID. Other countries were not in that favorable situation. You were alluding to Sri Lanka. I was before posted to Kenya. And it is clear, if we want to deal with debt and debt relief, and that is also on the agenda very high of the G20, we need transparency. We need to know what kind of debt a country has, to whom. It cannot be that financial institutions, for example, like the IMF or the Paris Club is going into a deal and the money is not actually going to the country but is going to another country to serve their debt. So that is on the agenda, and it is of utmost importance that the debt crisis is not turning into a real global crisis. So very much looking forward to work with India on that. And I mean the Indian government was very prudent during COVID when it comes to new debt and found itself also in a better position after COVID when it comes to the finances.
But a related aspect is the issue of black money, corruption, anti-terror financing. How is the India-Switzerland cooperation coming along on that front?
So I arrived 2 years ago to India and was in the happy position that black money isn't an issue anymore. And that can be easily explained because India and Switzerland signed a bilateral treaty on the automatic exchange of bank information. So each year bank information is automatically exchanged from Switzerland to India and from India to Switzerland. And with that, it's not an issue anymore. There is transparency, there's a working mechanism on a yearly basis. So black money isn't an issue anymore, which makes my life as Swiss ambassador much easier, and I can focus on positive things. And maybe the fact that Switzerland signed a treaty with India is also a part of a bigger, more inclusive vision of the Swiss government, who wants to turn the Swiss financial center into a sustainable financial center. And Switzerland will be very vocal also in the G20 to see all countries to adhere to all the standards and regulation when it comes to financial regulations. So today Switzerland's government is in favor of international standards worldwide when it comes to financial regulations, and wants to shift Switzerland's financial center, which is one of the biggest ones, towards a sustainable financial center. So it's much bigger than a treaty between Switzerland and India. It has been a huge shift, a very positive shift of the Swiss government strategy when it comes to Switzerland as a financial center. So that is it when it comes to the automatic exchange of bank information, when it comes to the fight against the financing of terrorism. The fact that Switzerland was present at the conference No Money for Terror shows you that we attach a lot of importance to the fight against the financing of terrorism. And the head of delegation was also very clear and made a point that there are regulations in place and they have to be transformed into national law and then being applied worldwide. So there as well, the message was clear. It's not enough that some countries are actually fighting the financing of terrorism. We all have to do that. And unfortunately, the fighting of the financing of terrorism is also part and parcel of the G20 agenda. And Switzerland will be an active and positive member of the finance track, supporting India in quite a challenging G20 presidential environment.
Ambassador, besides terrorism, another crisis confronting the world at large is climate change.
Yeah.
How do you look at it, and what can the two countries do together or alone or in collaboration with other countries going forward to tackle this clear and present danger?
Well, thank you for this question. One of the priorities of Switzerland in the Security Council is the link between security and climate. And this is a subject that not all members in the Security Council share as being part or should be part of the agenda of the Security Council, but it already shows you that for Switzerland there is a link between security and the climate change. If you have a look at the Indian government's policies and the Swiss government's policies, as I said, the Honourable Prime Minister is very much focusing on sustainable energy, solar energy, and Switzerland's government is trying to shift the investments of the Swiss financial center towards sustainability, which could be Switzerland's biggest contribution to mitigate and fight climate change. But bilaterally, there are also things happening that are really great. Switzerland and India, IIT Delhi, Madras, and the Federal Institute of Technology in Switzerland, Zurich and Lausanne, together came up with a new kind of cement. And that cement needs 40% less of CO2 to be produced. And on top of it, is cheaper than the current cement. That was one of the innovations Indo-Swiss innovations that was presented at Sharm el-Sheikh in the Indian pavilion. I have Indian real estate companies, huge real estate companies, cement companies, but also Swiss cement companies, worldwide companies that are in the real estate sector that have an interest in that. It could be India's and Switzerland's biggest contribution to change through an innovation the CO2 emissions of one single industry, which is one of the biggest, unfortunately, contributors to climate change. So, but there's much more that we can do. I mean, there are a number of Swiss clean tech companies already present in India. And when it comes to sustainable infrastructure, which is also something on the agenda of the G20 and very dear to the Indian government. The new airport Noida is going to be built or is being built as we speak by Zurich Airport, and the objective is to have a net zero airport with the newest technologies when it comes to sustainability.
Ambassador, finally, I want to ask you about the 75th anniversary of India-Switzerland relations. What are the events planned through the year, and what can you expect going forward in terms of visits, maybe?
Yeah. Well, if you have a look at the world, and we were discussing the state of the world, which is very challenging, I think it is incredibly important that countries that are friendly countries work with each other and pay attention to each other. And that is the case between Switzerland and India. So we're not only celebrating 75 years of India's independence and incredible trajectory or the establishment of our bilateral relations. Many countries do that. But Switzerland is the only country that is celebrating 75 years of friendship, because India had chosen Switzerland as the very first country to sign a friendship treaty with. That was on August 14th in 1948. So in August this year, we will be able to celebrate 75 years of friendship. And I'm hoping that we will be able to have a presidential visit to India. We are in contact with Indian authorities, always being mindful of the fact that India has a busy agenda too. And when it comes to our interactions, we would like to have interactions with the Indian people. We did that last year already with a huge public diplomacy outreach on finding innovative solutions on sustainability. My staff from Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata, they were in 30 Indian cities, talking to 9,000 Indian scholars and pupils on that. And we would like to do the same. We would like to go for another public diplomacy project and have a conversation with the Indian people. So we are planning 75 interactions with this year and next year all over India on different subjects. But I think it's very important that we listen to each other. And the biggest opportunity for us, Switzerland, to listen to India is definitely by reaching out to the Indian people. And the people in India are very kind and open to us. So the next 2 years will be, again, a listening tour, but also a conversation with the Indian people.
On that note, Ambassador, may I thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with our viewers on this special broadcast. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And may I wish you a very happy New Year again. Thank you.
Same to you, Mr. Ramachandran.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you. And now to our Q&A segment, in which you get a chance to ask us and our experts about G20. Now we have a viewer who has sent us this video. Take a listen.
Hello, my name is Suyesh and I am from Noida. And my question is, what does a troika mean? What does a G20 Troika mean? What are its functions and what is its importance? Thank you.
So Suyash from Noida wants to know, what is a Troika? What does the G20 Troika mean? What does it do and why is it important? And I asked Dr. Swasti Rao from the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses in New Delhi for an answer. She's an associate fellow at the Europe and Eurasia Centre. And here's her reply. Take a listen.
When a grouping as important as the G20 has its agenda led and sustained via the formal framework of the Troika by developing countries for 2 successive years and maybe even beyond that, it indeed is correct to hail the current moment of the G20 as the moment of the Global South. So what is remarkable about this arrangement is that 1, it ensures that the virtue of continuity and collective action remain in the G20 leadership and agenda setting instead of, say, abrupt disruptions that might render the efforts futile. And 2, it is indeed historic that India is not only becoming the G20 president for the first time, but also that the current and the next Troika of this grouping comprises solely of the developing countries that are also referred to as the Global South. This enables the Global South to galvanize the developmental, financial, macroeconomic agendas of the G20 in a way that is more favorable to their concerns and requirements. See, it is in the Global South that the majority world population resides. It is there that famine, hunger, poverty, food security, civil unrest, skewed distribution of pandemic vaccines, the lopsided distribution of SDR rights by the IMF, all of this is faced by the Global South. Therefore, when a grouping as important as the G20 has its agenda led and sustained via the formal framework of the Troika by developing countries for 2 successive years and maybe even beyond that, it indeed is correct to hail the current moment of the G20 as the moment of the Global South.
So Suyash from Noida, I hope that answers your question. Put simply, a G20 Troika comprises the past, present and next president of the G20. And viewers, do keep sending us your questions. All you need to do is record a video on your phone and send it to us on our Twitter account @DDIndiaLive. I repeat, @DDIndiaLive, or simply type your question and tweet it to us. You can do that on other platforms also, such as Facebook and Instagram.
Want to know about India's G20 presidency? Or you have certain questions about the same? We have you covered. Send us a 1-minute video telling us your name and city, followed by your question about India's G20 presidency, and you'll get your answers from our host and experts. Watch India Calling every Sunday, 6 p.m. only on DD India.
And finally, take a look at activities planned for next week. The first infrastructure working group meeting of the G20 finance track will be held in Pune on 16th and 17th of January. Now, Pune is a city in the western Indian state of Maharashtra. It is home to many colleges and universities. In recent years, Pune has emerged as a startup hub, housing many IT, engineering and automotive companies. The 95-kilometer-long Pune-Mumbai Expressway is the first high-speed expressway built in India. Historical attractions include the 8th century rock-cut Pataleshwar Cave Temple. The Pataleshwar Caves are dedicated to Lord Pataleshwar, which is another name for Lord Shiva. The construction of this temple is believed to have been inspired by the Elephanta Caves and was left incomplete. And The first health working group meeting will take place from the 18th to 20th January at Thiruvananthapuram. Now, Thiruvananthapuram is the capital of Kerala. The city is famous for its beaches at Kovalam and Varkala, and the backwaters and the western Ghats as well. Onam and Vishu are two of many festivals celebrated in Kerala. The state is home to the Indian Space Agency, the Indian Space Research Organization, and Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. The Padmanabha Swami Temple is another major tourist attraction. And with that, it's a wrap, but news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. I'll see you same time next week. We leave you with visuals of a kite festival held in Gujarat. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
उड़े पतंग गुजरात नो